Welcome to the Mum CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roach. Join me as we explore the dynamic intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. From the challenges to the triumphs, we're here to unravel it all. Get ready for insightful conversations, practical wisdom, and a whole lot of inspiration. Let's embark on this empowering journey together. Hello and welcome to the Mum CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roche, and today I'm joined by Anja. Hello, Anja, and welcome to the show.
Hello.
Right, if you'd like to just introduce yourself to the audience, please.
Of course. So I'm Anja Harrison. I am a mum, but I'm also working as a program lead at King's College. I lead on the Applied Neuroscience master's courses, the online courses, and I'm also a CEO of the Collaborative Library.
Wow, so a fair few things on your hands there.
Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned you're a mum, so you've got two young children, I understand. And, you're deeply involved in both the academia side and entrepreneurship. How do you balance the demands of both?
That's a very good question. I don't actually know, to be quite frank with you. I think it's one of those that you just sort of like tumble into a little bit, huh? You're sort of like there crafting your career, and then at some point you realize, oh, I kind of also want a family. And then after that happens, it's only then when you really truly embrace the chaos that can potentially bring. I find specifically with very small children, like my oldest is now 4, so that is getting a bit easier to manage, but I guess it's a difficult one. I have a full-time academic job, as you've already highlighted, but I'm also really passionate about knowledge equity and making sure that people can access science and so on and so forth. And that's why I'm also running the collaborative library on the side, but kind of, as I'm saying, it's on the side. So it's in addition to my full-time not clinical, to my full-time academic job. And then my husband's as a clinician. That's what I was trying to say. So we're quite busy people, I guess. Little time.
Yeah, well, the time just disappears, doesn't it? And like you said, you almost like just build your life around your situation, if you like. When the children come along, things change and certain things have to be moved, but you seem to be doing that quite well yourself. So, what inspired you to create the collaborative library?
Yeah, so I guess that kind of like adding a little bit to the previous question as well. Like I do work condensed hours, so the Fridays I have off for my kids, which is something that I think is quite important. But I guess one of the reasons why I created the collaborative library with the help of the wider team and also my husband Anthony, whom I've dragged into this project quite unceremoniously, is that you see. Very often, people are interested about science, right? But they don't necessarily know where to access the knowledge. And also, if they're accessing some sort of information online, is it actually any good? How good is it? How good are the underlying studies? And so on and so forth. Very often, you hit a paywall at some point and you can't access, or you can access, but you can't really understand because it's all gobbledygook and really complicated to follow.
Yeah.
So, my passion comes from wanting to make sure that people actually can access the latest of knowledge that is generated in the research world. My background is applied neuroscience, psychoneuroimmunology, which is a very fancy way of saying the interaction between the body and mind, if you will,
Right.
specifically in context of chronic health conditions. And I think it's just something that I've come across time and time again, always this issue of access and of people not really knowing where to find information. And I felt like something is really urgently needed here. So, like a network, like a nexus where people can go to and they know the information on there is actually of good quality. And they can also, and this is the important part, they can understand and learn how to actually scrutinize information themselves rather than just saying, here's what it is, but we're kind of saying, and this is how you can actually judge for yourself on the basis of the knowledge that you have. So it's all about knowledge equity.
And how can, what kind of people are you working with basically that have access to this?
So anyone who's interested in science effectively. I mean, so we've got a working group who are quite diverse on this. And these are people with like a very formal educational background. So people with like, I don't know, professorial level people. We have people without any formal education. We have people with chronic health conditions, people with and without psychological sort of conditions. I think it's just important to kind of like include as many people as possible in sort of informing what we do on the library, so we can then also tailor it to as many people as possible. I guess if you were to sort of pitch it, I guess you would be looking to those interested in science. That's what the library is for. And I think there are many different applications of this type of platform, from anything from sort of like you just being curious about something to perhaps you having a query about something that's health related. I mean, I must say it's a fairly early sort of like stage of this platform. So if you're having a look now, you will see sort of like slowly accumulating lay summaries on different kinds of topics. But my vision is rather grand, you see. So the plan for this is to include universities across the entire globe and to basically almost like hijack their assessment processes. You know, like at university, you get like all these tests and all these exams and stuff.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is we're trying to basically make students contribute to the library in together with their supervisors and their marking professionals at the university, so they can do something for their CV, publish, but also at the same time it helps us create the library. So it's kind of a bit like a win-win for everyone. That's the idea behind it anyway.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you're trying to incorporate or involve different people, because one of the things that I see with specific things, not just in your area, is that you've got the professional who knows X, Y, and Z, but you've then got the patient or the person going through X, Y, and Z, and how do you marry the two together, which is something that you seem to be trying to work with different people just to get an understanding basically of what's
This is
actually happening.
literally exactly what my motivation is. I think there is so much like inequality and inequity when it comes to knowledge. Like very often, scandalously, all the research is funded by public funds, right? So we all pay for it in terms of our taxes and stuff. But then how can you actually get access to things? I know that there's the open access movement. So things are kind of like opening up with like more and more scientific journals saying, okay, so you can click on this article. But that still doesn't resolve the issue of people not speaking that language, if you see
Yeah.
what I mean. I think it's something that's super important. I think it has a wide application, especially when I'm thinking, because obviously while we're here, we're talking as the mum CEO. Like, for instance, there are loads of settings where I think this could be really helpful for parents of younger children, for instance, understanding perhaps struggles that they have in school, or perhaps their child lives with some sort of physical health condition and they can understand and access better that type of information, which is something that really ought to be done already anyway, but obviously at the moment isn't really catered for. So I have this grand vision of creating a library where people can ultimately really access the latest of the latest and really make informed decision about their lives and everything that sort of like matters to them.
Yeah, so it's essentially trying to sort of bridge the gap basically between the research and people's everyday lives, basically. And have
Exactly
you
that.
got are you focusing on a specific issue, or you've got various topics under the one umbrella?
So obviously my background is applied neuroscience slash psychology. So I think because of the networks and how it works out, you kind of start usually where you come from a little bit. That said, I am networking like no other at the moment. I was on mat leave a year ago and I basically had about, I don't know, 10 pitch meetings a week with my daughter strapped to me, sleeping on me. And I think this has been really successful and also really important because we've now got loads of interest from the space community, space environmentalism, which I didn't necessarily really realize was a thing, but it is.
Right.
We have a lot of sustainability related companies, but also institutions, charities, professional organizations that are starting to wanting to get involved for obvious reasons. We also have some interesting links with sort of the engineering sector. So I think what the vision is for this to be all encompassing one fine day. But what I'm really keen on is for this to actually reflect what people want to see. So
Mhm.
it's a community-driven effort, if that makes sense. So if
Yeah.
people think it's relevant, those sort of like corners of science and research will build quicker than perhaps others. But ultimately, we are hoping to make it really inclusive in terms of all different disciplines and backgrounds and stuff.
Yeah, and I think, it is a really important thing, but I like, one of what you've mentioned there about obviously doing your networking, and you've got, one of your youngest basically strapped onto you, because I think that's another issue that almost blocks people from going into whether business or career, because most people feel like, oh, once I become a parent, it's going to really stop me. But I feel like we're not there yet, but
Mm.
they're a little bit more accepting that,
It's evolving. Yeah, I agree. I will say this though, that I think out of all those meetings that I've had, the majority of them, actually having a little one in there was a fantastic talking point, kind of like easing up the conversation. I
yeah,
will say this though, that I think I've also had the opposite end of the spectrum where people were a bit weirded out by it and sort of saying, this is a bit unprofessional potentially. But my sort of counter argument for these things would then be, are those the people I want to work with? So I think it's a little bit like you need to kind of like it won't fit for everyone. I think nothing that we can do, our own careers and generally the way that we network and interact and also deliver work won't always work for everyone, but that may be fine. And I think I'm one of those people that, I want it all and I want it now. As what was it? That band? That was a song, wasn't it? But it's just, I think it's a little bit about giving it a good go and
yeah,
also not being so harsh on yourself. Like, even if something tanks, like, what does it matter in the grand scheme of things? I've got two healthy children, nice husband, and I have a lot of opportunity, and I'm in a very privileged position to actually be trying out my passions and to be able to launch something like the collaborative library off the ground. So whilst I do appreciate it also comes with lots of baggage and potential issues and all the rest of it, I think I'm trying to constantly remind myself of how lucky I actually am because I really like I mean that like I really enjoy my job, my day job, and also the collaborative library. And I think it's brilliant that I have the opportunity to kind of like experiment with these things.
yeah. And I think it's something that's really good to inspire other people who have this fear where you sort of think, well, I have to do this at a time and wait, because we don't know when that opportunity is going to present itself, and you don't want to miss that opportunity,
Yeah.
and then regret it later on. So it's almost like
Oh,
you're trying to, I suppose, you balance it, and you can't be like somebody else. You have to run your life, your home, the way that works for you and your setting, isn't it?
I absolutely agree. I was incidentally last week I gave a keynote speech for some PhD students who were like looking what to do next.
Mm.
And the whole event, it was like as part of a conference, and the whole event was centered around like what do we do next? And then there's obviously the academic pathway, which usually leads to people either going like right into teaching or doing research, the classic stuff. And I guess I was a bit of a wildcat in that context because I did so much random stuff. I mean, I started out doing research, then obviously had my kids, then still did a bit of research, but now I'm doing more the educational pathway, but also doing all these other things, which are really exciting. And I think it's important to remind ourselves that established pathways are for some people, and they might be well-trodden paths that people enjoy walking on, but there's also a real opportunity to do something rather out of the box. And very often people will really enjoy the process. It obviously also means if you're going into a bit of uncharted territory in that sense, that you might not feel contained at certain steps of the time. But that's why, for instance, I like my security. I want to know, for instance, being a CEO as well, I want to make sure that I can actually, like, I have my finances in place. That's why I have a day job. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I can't do like something on top of that. And I think the collaborative library was developed and conceptualized in such a careful and really planned out way that I was able to actually make sure that I can run this for a very long time until one fine day it sort of like sustains itself and does what it needs to do. And I think I'm very into audiobooks, you see. Recently listened to one on how big things get done by this professor who's like accumulated this huge data set on like big projects and then basically evaluated how many of them actually get turned into action. And it turns out that 99.9% or something, no, 99.5% of them actually don't get done. So
Well,
that means the minuscule minority of the big projects get done. And
Yeah.
when you then listen to the whole thing, you come to the conclusion that very often it's because of a lack of planning and sort of like overestimating success and underestimating the time and money and effort it takes for these things. So I think if anyone listens to this who's not sure about like what they're wanting to do, definitely plan. Plan to the point of where you think this is excessive now. Keep planning. And if you feel like, okay, so now roughly I know what I'm doing and how I'm going to do it over the course of time, and then you add a little bit of an extra buffer of time and money and commitment sort of like into that, and that's probably when you're about ready. I mean, to be quite fair, I don't think I necessarily had all of that knowledge at the beginning, but I kind of like intuitively seem to have
Mhm.
taken a few right steps along the way to kind of like make sure this runs. But it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you want it all and you want it also all to go well. And then there's sometimes that moment where you're thinking, am I basically going to stop this and just focus on other stuff, or is it worth continuing? And it's just sort of like a continuous process of
Yeah.
taking back and looking and deciding, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mm.
and it's true that, the point you've mentioned about, obviously, especially around planning and finances and stuff like that, because sometimes I think for people it's almost like, yeah, I'm just going to stop doing X and then go straight into the whatever it is. But when you're starting out, there is quite a massive financial
Oh yeah.
requirement basically to sort of start things out. It's not huge, not because you're employing people from the word go, but it's still little bits of things to run. But one of the principles or one of the things that's always said is have multiple streams of income. So even if you're working part-time, that
Mm.
is helping you so you don't have that stress, I suppose, to think, how am I going to pay my bills this month?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is so important. I think this is also, quite frankly, I think I've been always sort of like interested in sort of CEOing, if you will, like kind of having my own little thing. But there's so much financial implication very often also because of the type of business that you might be looking into. Like, I don't know, let's say you have something where you need to store actual physical goods. That comes with a lot of different strings attached to the thing that we've come up with, which is obviously kind of just a bit of a brainchild thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, that still means that you have a lot of investment, like running the website, doing all the legal sort of side of things. It does amount to more than you would perhaps ordinarily think. But I think if you're kind of like doing that thing where you're front loading, where you have some control over what you need to spend
Mm.
at the beginning, and then you kind of like later on come up with a mechanism that will hopefully ensure sustainability. I think that is kind of the key thing. And also talking to a lot of people, like I've talked to so many people around like how to make it work, consultants to make sure that the legal basis of what I'm trying to do with my team is sort of like in place. And it's just so many different things to consider. So I definitely agree. You don't want to like feel that you can't pay your mortgage if you have one, or not afford food or something if you're going for your dreams. So I think setting yourself up in a way that you can kind of like do both
Mhm.
and with a reasonable time commitment so you don't end up working every weekend and all evening, because that obviously is also an issue, isn't it? If you have
Yeah.
kids,
Yeah, no,
like
absolutely.
you only have them on a morning and a weekend and an evening kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then on an evening they're also slightly over because they've had a long day too, haven't they? So you kind of like want to make sure that you don't miss out on all the quality time with them. So
Yeah.
it's really like making some very informed and I think deliberate choices around that,
Mhm.
I find.
Yeah, and just having the balance, isn't it? And trying to manage it as best as you can. So, one of the things that you do, you are an advocate for inclusive and, authentic sort of education in science. What are the sort of challenges that you've seen, or come across? And,
Yeah.
and obviously you're trying to rectify that, but what are the challenges that you've seen?
Yeah, so I think there's a definite disconnect between conversation and conversion.
Right.
So you talk to people and they're immediately compelled by the idea. But
Mm.
then how do you convert? So the way that universities work is at quite the glacial speed. So obviously, because of all the implications of including universities, it means that we're going to build a really sturdy resource, but it also means that it has to go through sort of the mill of the university's processes, which is incredibly slow, eye-wateringly so. But I will say this, that I think it's the innovative crowd that drive this. So, for instance, at King's, like the Dean of Education is absolutely excellent. I mean, she's got so much knowledge in the area, and she's really willing to kind of like
Mhm.
um support and give an opportunity to kind of like build something as meaningful as this, and offering the chance to for students to kind of like take it further. And we are seeing this across a load of different universities. The funny thing is, like, on the face of it, if you look at the website, we've got like quite a few participating and partnering organizations, but you don't see what's in the background. So we're currently talking to in the region of 150 different universities and professional organizations, which is a lot of
It's a lot.
like, but it takes time to convert them. So
Yeah,
whilst it looks like they're on the cusp of all signing on, like it's been a real sort of waiting game in many ways. But I guess it's, yeah, this is probably also the most surprising thing, because obviously we did our market research asking like how would people want to be using the platform, how we sort of like conceptualizing what we're doing, and how can we pitch, and who do we speak to, and that's all wonderful in terms of planning, but how it actually panned out is quite different. So I think that's probably been the most difficult bit, to kind of like keep at it and kind of like organize and make sure that you follow up with people in the right sort of way. I've also read a lot of book on how to get that conversion. Um, so bear with us on this one, but it certainly is an interesting one. I think you also learn about yourself a lot in the process of that, don't you? Like how well dedicated are you actually to what you're trying to do here? And I think if I didn't have that dedication to wanting to make this type of knowledge accessible to people, and if I didn't feel as strongly about it, I think I would have probably stopped 10,000 times already now. So I think it's just, yeah, kind of finding something that you care so much about that you're actually quite willing to walk the walk that it takes to get it to the finish line, isn't it? So yeah.
exactly. It is that passion though that drives you, isn't it? Because if you had no interest whatsoever, then it wouldn't get you out of bed.
Oh,
You wouldn't be
no, and
going
no,
to.
definitely. And I think, do you see, I'm a bit of a Labrador like that. So I see stuff and I get really excited about it for a bit, but then I kind of like, sometimes it's as hot as it is cold then. Do you know what I mean? You
Yeah.
look at something like, this is really fun, but then are you really wanting to put in all those hours to get
Mhm.
it forward? And I think this is something that I've come across in so many different ways. And I'm also thinking, I mean, sort of mum podcast here, thinking about the future here, right? So if we manage to pull this off and put together that kind of information, I mean, the future generations to kind of like benefit from having that information accessible in a way that they can digest. I mean, most of the lay summaries that we've currently got on are either audio or video. There's also some written ones, but that kind of resource I would have wished for when I was at university, even at school already. So I'm kind of thinking there's real value of creating something like this. And if I'm looking at my kids and thinking like, you're gonna need all the help you
Mhm.
get in order to navigate the future things in terms of sustainability, climate change, but even just sort of like the smaller scale things like, I don't know, managing, let's say, potential mental health conditions or
Yeah.
health conditions more generally, or finding out about something that you're passionate about. I don't know, let's say they have a passion in engineering, but they don't really know like what it all means. So they could go to somewhere and they can actually find out if they think it is as interesting as they think it is. So it has a lot of different implications and applications. So that's where it all comes from, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned something earlier on about, market research, and I just wanted you to just give a little bit of advice to somebody about how important is
Hmm.
that market research.
Yeah, it's absolutely crucial, isn't it? I think so. One of the things is you need to be in love with the problem, not the solution.
Mhm.
So that's probably boiling it down. I am in love with the idea of knowledge equity and distributing the knowledge and sort of making these networks. The way that we've organized and executed this platform has dramatically changed from day one of the inception of the idea. And I think if you are not willing to let go of the way that you're thinking about things in a certain way, then you're going to have a lot harder of a time to kind of like make it work later. I think you need to be willing to drop and pivot at the drop of a hat according to your market research, because ultimately you may have all the best intentions in the world, but if you're not willing to pivot, I think you're going to have a really hard time. And market research is the most important thing, especially in the early stages. And then obviously it's a continuous thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you need to come back, see, is it actually working? Is it working in the way that I'm thinking it is? Are there other things? So really having it community and end user driven, I think is a key thing.
Yeah, and it's all about that being innovative, isn't it? To kind of change with the times, because what you might think is fit for purpose now, if the customers or your client base is not finding it useful, there's no point having it at all in the first place.
Quite agree. Absolutely.
So, with your expertise in neuroscience, what are some of the practical tips or tools that you have used or you'd recommend somebody else to use to sort of manage stress or, maintain their mental well-being, especially, well, you've got several hats. You're doing so many different things, but, some people only have one thing, but I suppose the tools can apply to a variety of.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, I like exercise. And also dog walking, I find quite helpful. I've dabbled with things like obviously mindfulness and so on, but I find that I never do it. Sorry to sort of like say like that, but it's a bit like I get all motivated and then I just do it. So for me, it's like having a regular exercise sort of regime and kind of like making sure that I've got time for me, which is sometimes easier said than done, especially when you still have a baby that feeds through the night. You don't even get your evenings much, but it's just one of those things. I think with creating time and space and kind of not forgetting that you're probably going to be much more productive if you're reasonably well rested and not at the end of your tether constantly. So that would be my main take home from the last 5 years of doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I've done it for a lot longer, and it's like, yeah, it is so important. But like you said, it's easier said than done making that time for you, because you feel bad. You sort of think, oh, I'm not allowed to have a bit of time. And, I did that this week, and I did absolutely nothing. I gave myself time to just sit and just relax and didn't think of very much or do very much. So it's important.
Well done, you. Well done.
But it's the first time I've actually properly done it, in a very long time, but without actually thinking, oh, it's actually bad, or I don't know why you feel guilty, because at the same time you do need to recharge and you just need to be well rested to do the next thing. But it's great, Anja. Thank you so much for sharing all that. So with regards to obviously the collaborative library, where can people find you and whom are you sort of looking at connecting with, basically?
Yeah, so we have a website, www.thecollaborativelibrary.com. We're also on LinkedIn and the usual social media, so Instagram, Facebook, and so on. And if you are interested, sort of tag the page, follow us on our YouTube channel, perhaps to make us sustainable in future. What we're looking for is feedback, input, whatever you are wanting to give in context, but predominantly we're wanting to just help people spread the word of mouth and kind of like help us become a resource that people know about. So we're working on that, and we'd be delighted to hear from anyone who's interested.
No, that's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you.
Likewise, thank you for inviting me, and to all of those listeners, well, good luck with all of your endeavors. I'm sure you can do it.
Thank you very much.